I think one of the key ways in which Scottish climate action will be affected um, by hosting COP26 is that I think part of the reason that it's being hosted in Glasgow is because there's such a strong precedent for renewable energy production, renewable energy generation in Scotland. And so, I mean, and Scotland is already a world leader in its own right. They have really forward-thinking targets with the 2045 compared to the UK's 2050 for net zero for carbon emissions, and with the very high level of renewable energy production. The Just Transitions Commission, which is sort of from the ethical perspective of a fair transition to a carbon neutral future. And I think another key factor in Scotland that sets it up to be a host for the 26 conference of parties is the importance of the natural gas and oil offshore industry. And because of that, there's this focus on, it's really clear that it's a case example that there needs to be a transition to a more carbon neutral, more sustainable future. And so I think Scottish climate action, in one sense, is something that sets it up to be the host for COP, but also that will it can push the hosting of the COP can push all action in all of these areas in terms of working on the just transition, transitioning away from oil and gas, in terms of the the speed and the support for renewable energy generation. I think that will perhaps accelerate. And I think also one thing that will affect how climate action and policy is affected going forward in Scotland is this positioning vis-a-vis Holyrood versus Westminster, Scotland versus the UK. And there has been some speculation, sort of political commentary. There hasn't really been any research on this because it's a hypothetical now. But there's a question to what extent we're really going to have Scotland take a leadership role, or to what extent the UK government is going to try to sideline Scotland a little more. And there could be an example of them working together and pushing each other forward to higher ambition, or it could be a struggle between Scotland and the UK in who's going to really have a voice, or make a ambitious statement on a particular topic. And so whether climate policy is moved forward may have something to do with the synergistic relationship between the UK and Scotland. I think Scotland clearly has a desire to be seen as an independent leader, particularly with the Scottish National Party being the ruling government party in Scotland now, and there's interest, at least currently, in the Scottish National Party pushing forward to another independence referendum. And so the extent to which Scotland can present itself as an independent leader on the issue of climate change, and perhaps even more so an independent leader that's aligned with European goals and values, thinking about if Scotland were to become independent and were interested in becoming part of the EU again, which at least some of the political rhetoric is around that, you can see that as potentially a factor that might push climate policy forward, or might particularly shape climate policy in line with European Union goals. So I think, and I guess so that's a question about the magnitude of ambition and how climate policy is going to be moved forward in that respect. I guess in terms of particular areas in which it might move forward, I think there's if you look at the recent Scottish government plan for green recovery and for responding to the COVID-19 crisis, if you look for the program of government for 2020 to 2021, some of the areas in climate policy that have been highlighted the most in Scotland are low carbon energy projects. That's funding associated with the new Scottish National Investment Bank, green infrastructure, particularly building retrofits, renovations, transport, green infrastructure in those areas, and then natural capital projects. So peatland restoration, planting trees, afforestation, that kind of stuff. So those are probably some of the areas in which Scottish policy is going to be moving forward most as it pushes towards COP26. There is some encouraging news about Scotland in relation to the COP, in that there's a meeting that occurs of legislators from sort of national legislative bodies, parliaments, that occurs in the middle weekend of COP every time a conference of parties is held, and that's almost always, at least, I think, I can't think of an example in which it wasn't, but it's almost always held in the parliament of the host country. And this year, it's actually been determined that it's going to be held in the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh instead of the Parliament of the so-called host country, which is, you know, the member of the UNFCCC that's holding the conference. And so, I mean, that's just to say that, you know, Scotland really has an incentive, you know, holding a major event like that. That's part of the conference in the Scottish Parliament. Scotland has a real incentive to position themselves as leaders again, but it's also an opportunity, you know, in terms of, I think, civil society actors to push the government to say, hey, look, you really need, you know, if you're playing this role, you really need to live up to an ambition, the ambitious targets that we'd like to at least rhetorically position ourselves as having.